Hey, I have a new study for you guys. This is another Catherine Crompton piece published in 2020 called Neurotype Matching but Not Being Autistic Influences Self and Observer Ratings of Interpersonal Rapport. And Molly is here to assist me today. So this research is inspired by the double empathy problem and aims to add further evidence as to why we need to switch from a deficit to a difference model when discussing neurodevelopmental disabilities, by exemplifying that social difficulties experienced by autistic people is not because autism causes the inability to socialize, but because autistic people and non-autistic people communicate in such a way that impairs their ability to communicate with each other from both sides. So to do this, the study was split into two parts. Part 1 had 72 participants who were then put into pairs based on neurotype, where they were either put into a matched neurotype pair, where it was either two autistic people or two non-autistic people, or a mixed neurotype pair where we had one autistic and one non-autistic person. The pairs were informed of their partner's neurotype, and then they were asked to complete 3 tasks that involved them communicating with each other. After completing the tasks, the participants rated how they felt the rapport was. And to rate rapport, participants were given evaluation split into 5 categories that rated how the conversation was on ease, enjoyability, friendliness, successfulness, and awkwardness within the conversation. Each category was given 100 points for a total of 500 points for the total evaluation. And again, this evaluation is a self-rating, so this is the participants rating themselves how they felt the conversation was and how they felt they were doing at building rapport in the conversation. So out of 500 points, the non-autistic matched pairs, where both people in the pair were not autistic, gave themselves on average 406 out of 500 points on building rapport with their partner. In the autistic matched pairs, autistic people on average gave themselves 370 points out of 500 on building rapport with their partner. And then in the mixed neurotype pairs, where one person is autistic and one person is not autistic, participants rated themselves an average of 351 points out of 500 on being able to build positive rapport with their partner. So on the self-report measure, non-autistic pairs rated themselves higher than autistic pairs in being able to build rapport, with the mixed neurotype pairs giving themselves the lowest rapport rating. And what that shows is that regardless of individual neurotype, rapport is lower within mixed pairs compared with single neurotype pairs. And both autistic and non-autistic participants experienced lower rapport when the neurotypes were mixed. So part 1 of the study was participants rating how they themselves thought they were doing at building rapport within a conversation. Part 2 of the study was participants watching recordings of part 1 and rating how it looked like rapport was being built. So this is getting an objective outside perspective of how it looks like rapport is being built within the conversations of the participants from part 1. So part 2 had 80 participants, again 50-50 split between autistic and non-autistic individuals. Participants in part 1 were informed of their partner's neurotype. Participants in part 2 were not given that information. They were just told someone in this video might be autistic, they might not. The participants in part 2 filled out the same rapport questionnaire as the participants in part 1, just again, this is the outside perspective of it instead of the inside perspective. And just as a reminder, rapport is defined as how easy, enjoyable, friendly, successful, and awkward the interactions appear to be. So what's really interesting is that from the outside perspective, the autistic pairs had the highest ratings of rapport out of any of the pairs. And neurotype of the observer didn't matter. Both autistic and non-autistic observers felt that the autistic pairs had highest levels of rapport. So from the outside perspective, when it comes to building rapport, we had autistic people, then non-autistic people, then mixed pairs. Now, the reason that this is so interesting is because if you remember from part 1, non-autistic people rate themselves as having a higher level of rapport than autistic people. So you would expect that from the outside perspective, non-autistic people would have the highest level of rapport. But that's not what the results showed. And autistic people's self-report measures more accurately matched the outside perspective report measures, which means that autistic people seemed to have a more accurate understanding of the rapport that was being built in the conversation than the non-autistic people. This is shown really well in this graph, where we have the non-autistic matched pairs rating themselves as 406 out of 500 points on the rapport score. And this is autistic matched pairs rating themselves as 370 points out of 500 on the rapport score. And then this is the non-autistic perspective of the mixed neurotype pair, and this is the autistic perspective of the mixed neurotype pair. This is where the mean score is for the autistic to non-autistic mixed neurotype pair. And this is the neurotypical perspective. Look at how big this gap is. So this is the neurotypical people thinking that they're building a moderately okay rapport with autistic people. And this is autistic people being like, actually, rapport was kind of bad. And it was the autistic internal perspective of what was going on that best matched the external perspective of what was going on. So conclusion, autistic people and non-autistic people feel they build rapport and interact best with other people of the same neurotype, which again shows autistic people are not deficit in social skills. Our social skills are just different, and so when we try to communicate with each other, it's not as effective as when we try to communicate within our neurotype. And it appears autistic people have a more accurate understanding of how a conversation is going than non-autistic people.